Hi folks, I hope that you guys are doing pretty well. So today is Thursday, the 9th of October 2025, and in today's video I'm going to decipher for you Psalm 48, okay? Psalm 48 has been fulfilled under the law, if you like, but however, the first three verses have a second application for the millennial kingdom, okay? Now, Psalm 48 verses 1 to 14 it's actually linked to 2 Chronicles chapter 20 in particular, okay? And it's to do with the Moabites and the Ammonites versus Jehoshaphat, okay? And God gave Jehoshaphat a win over the Moabites and the Ammonites, okay? So you really have to read 2 Chronicles chapter 20 to get, the full picture. Now, this psalm is also important because Psalm 47 is actually a psalm for the millennial kingdom, if you like. And so, because of course Psalm 48 follows from 47, the first three verses have a second application here in Psalm 48. The first three verses, you could actually cite that they have a second application for the millennial kingdom, okay? And then verses 4 to 14 are under the law, in other words, that happened during 2 Chronicles chapter 20. In other words, the Moabites and the Ammonites and company versus Jehoshaphat, okay? Now, so this won't be a long deciphering. Basically going to decipher verses 1 to 3, really. Now, remember that I just told you that Psalm 47, it's a psalm primarily for the millennial kingdom, and because of that, Psalm 48 follows, and then we got the first three verses that do have an application for the millennial kingdom. But verses also 1 to 3, if you like, are also for this time period in 2 Chronicles, in chapter 29, words, the Moabites and the Ammonites versus Jehoshaphat, okay? So these verses, yes, they are for 2 Chronicles chapter 20, but they also, the first three verses have an application for the millennial kingdom because it's following on from Psalm 47. Now, notice when you read verse 1 here in Psalm 48, you read the word great in capitals. That's interesting. Why is that? Because it has a second application as well for the millennial kingdom. Not only great is the Lord that gave King Jehoshaphat a victory over the Moabites and the Ammonites according to 2 Chronicles chapter 20, but he's also going to be great. That's why it's highlighted here, in capital letters like a neon sign. Great is going to be the Lord in when he comes for the second coming, and greatly to be prized in the city, in other words, in the fourth temple, okay, of our God, in the mountain of his holiness. So I put here times 2 application, not only because the Jewish people gave praise to God with this victry of Jehoshaphat over the Moabites and the Ammonites, but people, especially the Jewish people, will praise God when he comes back for the millennial kingdom, because it's following on from Psalm 47, okay? So verse 1 has a double application for 2 Chronicles chapter 20, but also for the millennial kingdom. So commentary, this is a millennial kingdom prophecy upon the arrival of Jesus' second coming, with a double application for this period here in 2 Chronicles chapter 20, okay? Now notice the first word, great, which implies already the greatness of Jesus upon his second coming. Great is the Lord can be linked to Psalm 145 verse 3. Great is the Lord, which is a millennial kingdom psalm. Not only great is the Lord, but greatly to be prized according to all the prized psalms, prophecies in the book of Psalms, example Psalms 146 to 150, okay? And in the new city or fourth temple according to Ezekiel chapter 48 verses 31 to 35. So yes, the Jewish people and all the saints and those that might have free to the millennial kingdom will be praising God in his new fourth temple, okay? Now verse 2, beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great king. Again, it's got a second application here. Yes, you can probably link this more to this 2 Chronicles chapter 20. I understand that, but I also believe that it has a second application because, and I also think that it's another millennial kingdom prophecy because, the situation when Jesus comes back, to rule, with the fourth temple, is going to be a beautiful situation for the whole earth, okay? Now, put here a commentary, another millennial kingdom prophecy. Some Bible scholars think that this verse 2 actually applies to eternity when we inherit, the new earth, but not so. One of the pitfalls to note, if you like, in here is that the verse is not making reference to the New Jerusalem when the chosen ones, or those that got saved, chosen from the foundations of the earth, inherit the new earth, with the new city of Jerusalem. Now, why is this? It's because when the chosen ones inherit the new city of Jerusalem, there is no reference in the Bible or in the book of Revelation about Mount Zion exactly. When you read in the book of Revelation about the beautiful new city of Jerusalem coming down, adorned for God, there is no reference about Mount Zion, and because you're going to be inheriting a new earth, okay? So this verse then you can apply it to when Jesus comes back for the millennial kingdom, okay? Now the part that it reads now, beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth, refers to a few prophecies of reference as to how beautiful the fourth temple is going to look. First, think about how the geography of Jerusalem will change for the better when, according to Zechariah 14 verses 4 to 8, the Mount of Olives was split into two, north and south. Okay, so the geography is going to change. To think of how Haggai the prophet tells us that the glory of this later house, in other words, the fourth temple, will be greater than the former, in other words, the third temple, in Haggai chapter 2 verse 9. This prophecy implies how glorious and how beautiful the fourth temple is going to be. And thirdly, think about the prophecies in the book of Ezekiel, chapters 47 and 48, generally speaking, about how beautiful this fourth temple is going to be. See Ezekiel 47:12 in particular, where it reads, the river upon the bank thereof, and so on. Picture this in your minds, you got the throne of God, and then you got that beautiful river and all the trees and things like that. So if you read Ezekiel 47 verse 12, it paints this picture, if you like. So it's going to be, a very beautiful temple, like it reads here, beautiful for situation. The joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion, so when Jesus comes back, it's going to be quite a beautiful temple. Now verse 3, God is known in her palaces for a refuge. Yeah, of course, it has a second application, read 2 Chronicles chapter 20, but it also links into the millennial kingdom. For my commentary I wrote down, this is also a millennial kingdom prophecy aside from belonging to 2 Chronicles chapter 20. Jesus, the King of Kings, will be known in his new fourth temple as a refuge to all, because he will also be known as a Prince of Peace. And so if you are the Prince of Peace, God is going to become a refuge, okay? If you provide peace, you become a refuge to everybody else. Jesus' refuge is symbolic of three main things. Number one, his government, okay? So his government will provide a refuge for the people. His leadership, if you like, his justice, okay? And also his peace will also provide a refuge for everyone. And so one of the best prophecies to link these verses with Isaiah 9:7, I'm just paraphrasing here, of the increase of his government and peace, there shall be no end, and so on, okay? Jesus will also be known as a refuge, because according to Isaiah chapter 55 verses 1 and 3, he calls everyone that is thirsty, okay, to come to the waters of salvation, okay? In other words, Jesus is becoming a refuge, calling everyone that is thirsty to come to the waters of salvation, and to eat his bread on verse 2, or to believe in him, if you like. And in verse 3, he invites people to incline their ears and to come to his presence or to hear him. So all these things are symbolic of his refuge, if you like, okay? So to end up then, verses 1 to 3 have a double application, and they're also linked to 2 Chronicles chapter 20. Now verse 4, it begins to read, For lo, the kings were assembled, they passed by together. And then verse 5, they saw it and saw the marvel, they were troubled and hasted away. Commentary. This account from verses 4 all the way to verse 14, can be read or linked to 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verses 35 to 37 especially, but read 2 Chronicles chapter 20, gives you, that victory that God gave Jehoshaphat over the Ammonites, if you like, So generally speaking, Psalm 48 is linked to 2 Chronicles chapter 20, but because, just to finish up, Psalm 47 is predominantly for the millennial kingdom, then the first three prophecies in Psalm 48, if you give it a bit of a think about, or the first three verses, they do have applications for the millennial kingdom, because it's following on from verse 47, which is completely for the millennium, just about, and we read here, great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised in the city, Of course, this account, you can link it to 2 Chronicles chapter 20, but it also has a double application, I believe, because of how you read the words great, And if you just take into consideration everything that I read here, And then on verse 2, just to recap, beautiful the situation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion. The joy of the whole earth, okay? This is not just not talking about the victory that, Jehoshaphat had about the Moabites and the Ammonites, but, it's for the whole earth, So that's why it's also a millennial kingdom prophecy, and as much as, it belongs as a prophecy of praise, or the Jewish people praising, Jesus, back then. So, and then just to finish up, verse 3, God is known in her palaces for a refuge. Yes, of course, has a second application, in the 2 Chronicles chapter 20. God was a refuge, for the Jewish people by giving them that victory and so on. But, it does have a millennial kingdom prophecy, because Jesus, when he comes back, will be a refuge for everybody with his garment, justice, and peace. Okay, but then from verses 4 onwards, then things change a little bit. It becomes more of a, verses 4 onwards becomes more, the account in 2 Chronicles chapter 20, especially verses 35 to 37. Okay, all right, folks. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.